Hey guys, what's up? City Walk, City Wall here, and welcome back to Kobayashi Island. This episode, you've already seen me do the main thing, which is place down the Tokyo SkyTree, which is a really tall sort of observatory building, and I think it's going to be the tallest building in Kobayashi Island. I mean, it's really, really tall. You saw in some of those opening shots, and you'll see again in the shots, the cinematic shots at the end of the episode. It's like very tall. It's definitely the tallest thing here now, and I kind of like the way that looks. I don't think I want to put down a building in the future that's going to be taller than this. I think this is a good height to have sort of be the max in the city. So that's kind of cool. And when I was doing this, I obviously looked up the real Tokyo SkyTree and tried to get some inspiration from that. But the thing about it is that building in real life has sort of like a complex of buildings around it. It's like very sort of flashy, and what I wanted to do here was kind of turn this whole block a little bit more into like a public park or plaza, as opposed to have having a bunch of buildings here. And I know it's not like very close to the reality of this place in real life. I obviously was trying to do my own thing here, and I was thinking, a building like this maybe was built a while ago, like in the 70s or 80s or 90s, and it's a huge tourist attraction. It gets millions of people who come here every year. So maybe this plaza, at this point in time is not like run down, but has some wear and tear. Like the grass isn't 100% green everywhere anymore. It's like kind of lost like a little bit of its brand new shiny charm, and now it's kind of like a little bit more, it's like been here a while. So this plaza is not the nicest, newest thing in the entire world. So that's kind of what I was going for here. And the other thing about it is I was thinking that this SkyTree Plaza is definitely older than the monorail. So you can see what I end up doing is having the monorail loop around this block as opposed to trying to cut through it. And I partially did that because when I placed down the monorail, there was like a road in the way and I couldn't have it do the same route exactly as the train, so I had to have it turn. But also, I'm just thinking about the age of this plaza and the SkyTree. I want it to feel like it's been here a little bit, for a number of years. And some of the things in the city got built after it and are informed by the fact that it's here, like the monorail, for instance. So basically what I did, placed it down the middle of the block, put a bunch of ploppable surfaces, grass and pavement around on sort of top of the terrain to make it all level and flat and get really clean edges to this pavement area. And then just started placing some props, some benches, some lights. Now I'm putting down some decals, and in a little bit here I'll be putting down sort of like things to just kind of make it feel a little bit more busy and bustling here. Some tents and little stalls and umbrellas and I don't know, things that, make it seem like there's actually people here. And right now there really aren't any people here, but eventually once the downtown is around this area has a bunch of invisible paths going through it, so it will hopefully be kind of like a big area where people cut through the block in order to kind of take a shortcut when they're walking from point A to point B. So the other thing on this block is that train line that comes out of the station that we were working on last episode. That line kind of comes through this block as well. So part of what I did here was just kind of like finishing up where around that line, putting a lot of plants and bushes and trees and things, and using these really, really awesome retaining wall and tunnel assets that Revo released sort of recently. They're called retaining wall networks. They're sort of for rails, a rail yard, but I think they really work in all sorts of different places. They're going to be some of my go-to assets going forward in terms of retaining walls, because right now the retaining walls that have always existed that are obviously amazing and I use them all over the place, they're a little thin, and sometimes it's kind of annoying how thin they are because you have such a tiny margin of error for things kind of like sticking through them. And these new retaining walls that Revo released are much thicker, and they, on top of that, you know, obviously it makes that makes things easier to work with when they're a little bit thicker, but also they have like amazing sort of patterns and different like shapes to them. Some of them have like kind of thicker areas and thinner areas, and it's not just like a straight line like some of the sort of OG versions of retaining walls that were released forever ago and have always been used by everyone. So these new retaining walls I think are a little bit of a game changer, and I'm definitely going to be using them going into the future. The one thing about them though is that they are all very stone related, like kind of traditional looking, and sometimes I do like a good just plain concrete wall. So that's my one gripe with them, is I wish there was like a really just like a concrete version, like maybe a sort of dirty concrete with some water stains or some moss or some dirt on it, you know, something like that that's just a little bit more industrial looking, I think would be awesome. But other than that, they're really amazing assets. So you're seeing me now work on this third monorail station, and this is really only the second one that I'm actually detailing, and this is also going to be probably the second to last one in this direction. There's only going to be one more further along this line in sort of the direction of the ocean and the tip of the peninsula, and this one's pretty cool. You know, all these both monorail stations that exist for the suspended monorail are pretty awesome, the way that they have like an open area underneath them, so you can put them over the middle of streets. And so that's what I did here, but then also last episode I obviously put it over the middle of a train station. So they're pretty cool assets. And what you're seeing me do now is just kind of finish up the detailing around the plaza area of this SkyTree. So some food trucks, some balloon carts, couple little stalls here and there, market stalls, maybe there's people are selling art or something, and just some like fences around the edge on top of these retaining walls. So this is your last warning. Just one last time I'm gonna say it before I close submissions for the build off. Not really a warning, more of a friendly reminder than a warning. It sounds a little intense. In case you missed it, we're doing a build off competition in Kobayashi Island. I'm opening it up for you guys to build an area of the city and submit it to me, and the winner will get their little portion of the city placed into Kobayashi Island, and regardless we'll showcase them all at some point. But the submissions have been open for 6-7 weeks at this point, something like that, so it's finally time to kind of close that off and say, you know, we're about getting ready to finish that up and put the winner into the city. And if you haven't done it yet, this is your last chance. You probably have another week or two here until I actually go and decide on a winner and put that into the city. So just a friendly reminder. So what I'm working on right now, this road that kind of cuts through the middle of downtown, that is made up of 2 one-direction roads, 4 lanes in each direction, has like this kind of middle area that up until here it was filled by the freeway that goes over the top of it, but the freeway dead ends at this big street on the left, so there wasn't really anything in the middle of the road. And so what I decided to do was kind of make like a little decorative raised up walkway that connects you from that upper road over to this area. It was kind of like involved to make this. I had issues kind of across the board with heights and paths and things. Part of the problem is that road on the left that the freeway dead ends into and goes over the top of these 2 one way in each direction roads is a raised up road and it has a railing. So this path needed to get up above the height of the railing, which was kind of difficult to do. And I ended up having to use the network surfaces to make it look like the sidewalk was getting raised up. And then the sidewalk was like at the height of the top of the railing, and then the path went up and over that. But that was kind of involved. And then just making it so that the trees and things that I placed down actually went to the height that I wanted to. I had to use procedural objects with the tunnel blocks in order to kind of keep those trees at the right level. The tunnel blocks are pretty useful in that way because they are buildings, so trees like to snap to the height of them, the height of the top of them, as opposed to the ground height. So when you place those tunnel blocks down and put trees on top of it, it prevents any funky business from happening. Because a lot of times, if you're using the prop and tree anarchy and you raise up trees, over time, sometimes those trees kind of like disappear from the height that you want them to. Sometimes they just like jump down to the terrain level, and you don't really want that. You want to keep them where you place them. So putting down those tunnel blocks beforehand helps with that. And then now we're getting into the coolest thing, I think, for this episode. This is really awesome. I love the way that this turned out. This is honestly one of my favorite things that I've built in all of Kobayashi Island. And it's sort of like a custom apartment building / market that has this train line that cuts right through the middle of it. And I built it using a ton of little tiny buildings. And I did that sort of in order to make very custom shapes. As you can see, it's kind of like curving around the curve of the train track. And then, these buildings are really small and these areas are pretty big. So I used some slightly larger apartment buildings in the centers of the kind of blocky areas in order to like really fill it up. So you can see this is actually made up of 3 different buildings. There's the corner pieces that have like a sort of rounded edge to them. There's like the middle small apartment pieces that you're seeing me place down now that kind of make up the majority of what you're looking at. And then there's these larger apartment buildings that fill in the in-between spaces. So this was a lot of placing down buildings here. And then once that gets done, what I end up doing is detailing up the area inside of, this like kind of open area. So first thing I do is kind of make like a little parking lot entrance underneath this elevated road. And so there's going to be like a little bit of underground parking under there. And then the next thing I do is go through and place down a ton of billboards and signs all throughout that little open area. And I use a bunch of different kind of signs. There's a lot of kind of like smaller billboard type signs that I just plastered all over the fronts of the buildings, kind of covering up these windows. That's what you're seeing me doing now. And then after that, I use a bunch of wall signs that kind of stick out from the wall. So some of those are neon signs, some of those aren't neon signs. Some of them, there's one particular one that's really awesome that has a little bit more of like trussing that's holding it. And then the absolute coolest thing here that I think I did is what you're seeing me now. These things that I'm placing down are corrugated metal market stalls. They're similar to the little like market stall tents that I was placing down in the fish market and in the open air market in the marina area. I was also placing them down earlier this episode around the SkyTree. But these are the corrugated metal versions, which I haven't really used at all. And I raised them up so that they're more like awnings that go over these shop entrances, which I think turned out really, really awesome. They're a little bit not perfect just because they're technically stall covers, so they have like legs sticking down a little bit further than you would. Like if you were a real citizen, you'd probably hit your head on those things sticking down because they don't reach all the way to the floor. They're just kind of like weirdly hanging, like dangling down, which is kind of unsafe. And maybe you don't notice that if you're not super close to it, but I think overall those look really, really cool. And then the finishing touch, the cherry on top of the sundae here, was I never had used these before. There's these awesome lights that you're seeing me place down now that are for like expressways or something. They're 2 poles with like string going between them and a dangling light right in the middle. And they're much wider than that little alley that I made, so I was able to hide the poles inside of the buildings and just have string going between the 2 buildings and a light dangling right in the middle. And that just looked so good. It made that area look really amazing at night because it's like neon signs and then has these like dangling string lights. It looked just like so Japanese and cool, and just like a much better version of that little alley that I made last episode. So I'm really getting into doing things like that. I definitely have plans to make a lot more little areas like that all around downtown. I think they're just like really awesome little hidden things. So the last thing I worked on this episode is this block that is next to the SkyTree. And this area, I'm really starting to think we're kind of getting into corporate financial areas of Kobayashi Island's downtown. So this is going to be a lot more skyscrapers, kind of like plazas and parking garages, and kind of just stuff that you would see in like a financial district. A little bit less character, a little bit more straight edge. But the thing about it that is really awesome is, aside from it being skyscrapers and we're totally drastically changing the skyline of Kobayashi Island's downtown, these skyscrapers I have basically all set to be residential buildings because, you know, obviously in Rico you can set them to be whatever you want, you know, the Rico mod. And, you know, they start off as unique buildings, which I always find being weird because that's basically a park. And sometimes they come in as office buildings. That would be what would make the most sense if they were office buildings. But because this is City Skylines and you can't make a realistically sized city ever, you know, you're never going to have enough suburbs that it is realistic for and have, you know, just like millions of people living in the suburbs. There's always, for me, a problem of not having enough citizens. So I turn these really big buildings usually into apartment buildings in order to just like jack up the population of my city. So placing down these buildings is really going to impact the population in Kobayashi Island. And that's kind of the main reason why I like building areas like this, you know, even though it's not like high density of like nestling buildings into one another, which is what I find to be very fun. It's sort of more just like placing down one large building every once in a while and surrounding it by like a plaza or something. This area is going to make Kobayashi Island much more bustling, and it's going to kind of transform the downtown a lot into really like the heart of the city in terms of where people are going and what train lines are busy and things like that. So this plaza, there was a couple cool things that I did here. First one was, you saw me a little bit earlier place down a bunch of parking garages, and I kind of use that as the base of this plaza because downtown, it needs a lot of parking garages. And I thought this was kind of a realistic thing, like having the first couple levels of these skyscrapers be where people who work in the skyscrapers can park their cars. So place down the garages. Even though they're on a hill, I put them all on the same level in terms of their height, and then covered them up with ploppable surfaces. And then now what you're seeing me do is kind of detail up the area above that ploppable pavement. So I'm using expressway pillars, Ronix 69's expressway pillars, to make kind of like borders for these planters, putting some benches, trash cans, and lights around the planters. And then the other really cool thing that you saw me do was use these giant, I think they're like bridge assets. They're pillars that come up if you search pillar in the Find It mod. I'm not 100% sure what they're from. I feel like they're vanilla, but maybe they're not. But they're basically pillars for highways or bridges or something. And I placed one of them down here, and it was absolutely massive. So I used procedural objects to scale it down, and then made a double of it and rotated that 90 degrees. And all of a sudden we had like a big sort of statue thing here. So kind of the centerpiece of this plaza, which connects these 3 or 4 buildings here and have some like invisible paths going through this plaza. So this ideally would be a shortcut for people who want to get from point A to point B, similar to the plaza around the SkyTree, where these invisible paths are like, are allow citizens to cut through the block. So hopefully that entices them to walk around up there. We'll see when things actually start getting busy around either side of this area. And the last thing, I wish I could have just cut this out of me placing down decals, but I did some work while the decals were here, and then you'll see at the very end of the episode I delete the decals, but these decals don't look very good, so you can ignore them. Anyways, that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I am shifting focus a little bit from here on out to my other series, so you may start seeing Kobayashi Island episodes a little bit less often, but they're definitely still coming. There's a lot to do in the city, so look forward to that, and I'll see you all next time.